Welcome to Smart Manufacturing Mindset, where we explore the strategies, technologies, and leadership perspectives driving the future of manufacturing. This season, we're diving deep into the gritty details of what must be true for smart manufacturing success, covering key topics like organizational design, the role of technology partners, developing trust, change management, modern architectures, and skill development. Smart manufacturing is a journey, a team sport, and success requires every stakeholder working together to drive real transformation. This is Smart Manufacturing Mindset. Let's dive in.
Welcome back to episode 2 of season 2 of the Smart Manufacturing Mindset podcast. I'm Jeff Winter, advisor to CESMII, and your host for this season's deep dive into what it really takes to thrive in today's manufacturing landscape. Now, if you tuned in to episode 1, you know that we focused on the leaders of transformation, the architects behind the roadmap, the ones pushing innovation, guiding adoption, and trying to move the industry forward. But in this episode, we're flipping the spotlight because leading transformation is one thing, but leading the entire business while transforming, that's a whole different challenge. So this episode is about the people who own the P&L, the profit and loss, the ones responsible for keeping the lights on, the lines running, the product shipping, and the business performing, no matter what stage of transformation it's in. Because let's face it, change is messy and progress isn't always linear, and transformation can't be allowed to become a distraction from performance. So we've got 3 incredible guests joining us today, each with a lot of responsibility and firsthand experience navigating this balancing act. First, we have Audrey St.Onge, President and General Manager of North America for Lallamand's baking business unit. Audrey's role goes far beyond just operations. She owns the full business: production, manufacturing, sales, marketing, finance, quality, distribution, you name it. She leads a roughly 400-person team across 4 fermentation production sites in the US, Canada, and Mexico, as well as an additional blending site in Mexico. Her transformation efforts include enterprise-wide data maturity, historian implementation, and a hub-and-spoke BI architecture, all while maintaining profitability in a cost-sensitive food market. Audrey's answers are driven by an operator's discipline and a business owner's lens. Then next, we have Jim Beilstein, Vice President of Global Operations and Supply Chain for Owens Corning's $4 billion insulation business unit. Now, while Jim's scope is narrower than Audrey's, just focused on operations and supply chain, his scale is pretty massive, with 36 global manufacturing sites, operations in 11 countries, and roughly 5,600 employees under his leadership. He also chairs the company's Operations Leadership Council, which is a cross-business forum guiding enterprise-wide standards and productivity and operational excellence. But what really gives Jim credibility in this conversation is his track record. Because before stepping into his current role, he actually led Owens Corning's enterprise engineering and digital transformation efforts, meaning he's worn both the transformation and the operations hats. And his leadership mantra: productivity with purpose. And finally, we have Courtney Andersen, Vice President of the $4 billion Morning Foods business unit at General Mills. Now, while her direct team is lean, around 30 people, her scope includes 8 manufacturing sites and roughly 2,000 employees across cereal and yogurt operations. So she owns the P&L, but the majority of the operational workforce actually reports up through centralized supply chain pillars, making her success dependent more on influence and not just authority. But what gives Courtney credibility is her path. 20 years at General Mills, half of it spent in the plants, and at global leadership roles in Europe and Australia, overseeing end-to-end supply chains. So with an engineering background and experience as a plant manager, she brings a grounded operational mindset to strategic transformation. And today, she's not just keeping Cheerios on shelves, she's making sure innovation doesn't come at the cost of execution. These are the people who have to fund the transformation and have to live with the consequences, all while simultaneously hitting every operational and financial target along the way. So to make the most of this episode, based off of the interviews that I had, I divided it into 4 major topics. First is balancing performance and progress. Basically, how leaders manage their time and focus between running, improving, and transforming the business. The second is filtering the noise. How do they evaluate new technologies and new initiatives and decide what's worth their time and investment? Third is protecting the core. How do they keep operations from getting distracted by the next big thing? And lastly, advice. What would you say to others with P&L responsibility looking to do what you have done? So starting with the first topic, balancing performance and progress, what stood out to me the most was how differently each guest defined the balance between run, improve, and transform the business, and how that balance even changes depending on business conditions. Courtney gave one of the most honest and detailed breakdowns on her time shifts depending on whether things are running smoothly or not. Let's hear what she has to say.
So we call this, run, improve, and transform is what we call our business performance management cycles. And so I will tell you in 2 scenarios and how I spend my time. So when things are running well, which is, knock on wood, been where I'm at right now, I would say myself, I spend probably, 40-50% of my time in the run. And I probably spend, 20-30% in the improve bucket, and then probably 10% in that transform. And luckily our cadences and our S&OE processes are built for that, for when things are going well, for me to spend that time doing that and to delegate more to my team, a lot of the run, and I don't have to engage in that as much. And then I do get to then focus more on the improve and transform. When things are coming at us and things are not going so well, if I'm really honest, I can probably spend 80+% of my time in just the run. And it's really more around stakeholder management and communication a lot of times. And then probably 15% in improve and 5% in transform at best. So it can definitely swing very wildly depending on how our operation is running. I love to spend my time more in the improve and transform. And so it's one of the things I was just talking with my team last week. And I said, we need to figure out how to stay in this place of having the ability to step back and really think about strategy and some big improvements we want to make and some transformation and getting out of the hamster wheel of run.
You can feel her experience in that answer. It's not just theory, it's reality. And she's not wrong. When you're firefighting, transforming goes out the window. But let's stick with Courtney as she talks more about how to rebound once you're in that firefighting mode.
The run part that's I think demotivating for people, it's when you're in that space when you are, things aren't going the way you want. You are spending a lot of time on communication, stakeholder management, recommunicating, and it doesn't feel like you're, that's where you want to spend your time, and it doesn't feel as effective, if I'm honest. And so I think most people get a lot of passion and when you see like you're making some big differential changes and moving the organization in a big leap. And so I do think there's something inspirational about people having the time, myself included, to really focus on the improvement, transform, because it is exciting and it's new. And as a supply chain, we have to run the business, and we know that. And we know that is the expectation. That is just the bare minimums that we have to do. And so, and we get that things are thrown at us every day, every hour, recently. And so I do think figuring out how to be resilient, that's been really critical. if you can have some good resilience, then that does free you up more quickly to go back to an optimal operating model.
The idea of run as a baseline, not the goal, is something I think more leaders need to embrace. The trick is making sure your structure can support that bounce back. Which brings us to Jim. Let's hear what he has to say.
So I spend, a fair amount of time in each of those buckets. Interestingly, coming into this year, we kind of restructured our team a little bit so that we had people who were focused on the day-to-day operations, and their focus is to execute. We have people who are focused on our productivity metrics and making sure that we're driving that in conjunction with stable, safe operations.
That kind of layered thinking is what allows leaders like Jim to operate at scale. He's not just managing transformation, he's enabling it without losing grip on the day-to-day. But I pushed him a little further to find out, what does he do on his personal time with this? Let's hear what he has to say.
In a stable, well-running operation that we have today across our network, and it's taken us a lot of hard work over the last couple of years to get to that place and be consistent there, is then that allows me to spend a lot more time on making sure that our productivity programs for the year are on track, making sure our TPM progress, because we use TPM as our operating model, is progressing at the pace I want to see it happen, because those two things then allow us to move the strategic items forward. And because we have a number of major decision points and they are mapped out for the year on the strategic side, I spend probably, if you would ask me today, so far this week, for example, I've probably spent maybe 10 to 20% of my time on day-to-day operations, about another 20% of my time on productivity and driving the operating model forward in the rhythms of our business. And then 60% of my time actually this week on strategic things that we're working on. And that'll fluctuate week to week, but I've been able recently to spend a lot more time on the strategic things for my business because there hasn't been a lot of firefighting or a lot of urgency in the day-to-day operations, which is a benefit, for sure, but a lot of hard work to get there over the last couple of years.
And then we pivot to Audrey, who approaches balance from a completely different angle.
If I divide my call it weekly time, I would say 80% of it is spent on the operation. And then I would say breaking down from there, I spend time with sales. I spend time with the quality group to understand where the gaps are, challenges, etc. But I'm like I said, I'm very 80% operationally focused. We're a call it a cost leadership where volume is required in the yeast business. Nobody wants to pay more for a loaf of bread, so managing the costs and expenses for plants, it's critical, right? Because we play in that food space, and ensuring those facilities manage their expenses to allow this better controllable, so that again that has a whole impact to our business. But 80% of my time, I would say, is spent on operations and understanding and making sure things are well run.
Now, it's important to remember when Audrey says 80% of her time is on, operations, she's talking about running the business, but not necessarily just manufacturing or supply chain. Remember, as the president of an entire business unit, in this case, operations includes all of her departments. So her version of running the business spans the full enterprise, not just the factory floor. But pay attention to what she adds next. It's not just about what she's working on, but about whom she's working through.
I'm very heavily focused on the operations and ensuring that they have the right support and the business acumen that is required to run some of these large facilities. Having the right talent on board is another part of where I focus a lot of my time and energy, and developing the talent. So I have groups of folks that are very, call it strategically positioned to help that continual learning. So my time is mainly divided around the people, and also getting everyone aligned to the strategic objectives. So I would say 50 to 70, I'd say 70% of my time is spent on people, and making sure that the message and the objectives are very clearly heard, and that we're driving them. We have operational objectives that we measure against. So we always say define, measure, and improve. If you don't know what you're trying to measure without a good definition, we can't improve. So we're always looking to better our ways. But I would say 70% of the time, I'm all about the people.
So Courtney, her focus flexed based on real-time operational needs shaped by a matrix structure, where she leads through influence more than direct reporting lines. Jim, well, at least right now, he is more consistently strategic in his approach, enabled by a clearly defined organizational model with direct control over operations and a strong governance rhythm. And Audrey, as a business unit president, brings a different lens altogether, especially because her position spans so many operational functions. So her attention is often centered around cross-functional execution and delivering end-to-end business results. But now that we've covered how these leaders balance the day-to-day with the transformation, the next natural question is, what do they say yes to? I mean, every week they're probably pitched new tech, new tools, new solutions, new things that they should do. But when you're responsible for the P&L, you don't have time to chase hype. You need a way to filter through the noise. So I asked everyone what filters they used when something gets brought to their attention, any new technology idea or initiative. And their answers were telling, not just in what they said yes to, but in how they structured their thinking to cut through the noise and find what actually moves the needle for each of them. And I wanted to start here with Audrey because her filter is incredibly grounded in frontline execution. And as a business unit president in food production, her environments can be harsh, but they're fast-paced and they're extremely cost-sensitive. So her first filter is all about practicality. Listen to her answer.
My first filter is ease of operation. And I would say my second is in terms of the installation of where, call it new sensors or new data points are coming. That always is a question. Like, I think when we look at our production lines of such, when we have new sensors being, call it marketed to us, it's got to be durable enough to sustain how operators interact with it. So I'd say my filters are more around the easeability of the equipment that's being installed.
It's not about novelty for her. It's about durability and decision clarity. If the tech can't survive on the floor or doesn't drive better decisions, it's out. That kind of frontline mindset is so critical, especially in a volume-driven industry. But now let's move to someone who looks at the bigger picture first. Jim's first filter starts higher up the chain. He evaluates based on outcome alignment. He's less focused on what the tech does and more on whether it contributes to the results that his team is accountable for. Listen to his answer.
I would say when we're evaluating new technologies to apply, we're really looking for the match against the outcome we're trying to achieve. And then how much customization or modification will it require us to do either in our business processes or in the technology itself to achieve that outcome we're looking for. Then you kind of cascade down through your typical ROI, time to value, and everything else. We also, our IT department also kind of stays a little bit focused. We don't want to get spread too wide and too thin in technology either, because we want to look for that opportunity to leverage technology at the enterprise level across our manufacturing operations. I think that makes a lot of sense because it keeps us kind of honed in on making sure that has leverageable value in what we're doing. But really, it is really important, and I think it's the hardest thing to stay focused on is actually driving speed to the results. And so we'll take some risks on experimentation technology just to try to see if we can get to the result faster versus using a huge platform that takes a long time to deploy, secure, train, and everything else on. So it's kind of a balance between the two, but we have a productivity target that we're trying to hit every year. We have a productivity target that's laid out for the next 3 years. So it's a balance between achieving results today and keeping us moving forward for the future in terms of how we're going to generate long-term results as well.
What I appreciate is that he's not overly rigid, but he's very clear. If it doesn't fit into the strategic initiatives that are already underway or support one of his core outcomes, it doesn't really make the cut. But even if it does, Jim stays disciplined about scope. That's a great example of strategic patience, I like to call it. Knowing that doing less better is more valuable than doing more poorly. And finally, Courtney brings a sharp business-first lens as to how she filters. Listen to her answer.
All right, if somebody comes to me with a technology, I really do want to understand what problem it's solving for the business and what is that true return on investment that we're going to get from it. And I think if it has the opportunity to solve a real pain point for people, then you don't have to worry about buy-in and ease of integration. When people don't see the inherent value in it and they think that we're just doing it to move forward on a digital journey, I think it's harder to get that integrated into the business team. So if it solves a problem and makes people's lives easier, or an automation or something people have been waiting for and asking for, we have a couple of those on the list that I would say, if I know that it's something my team has really been a priority, a pain point, then I think that's an easy win in my mind.
I love that clarity. It's not about innovation for innovation's sake or tech for tech's sake. It's about solving something that matters. But what really stood out actually was her second filter, which is a perspective I don't think we hear enough.
The second filter I would use from what is some technology we could go after? I would say risk, but I always look at what is the risk of not doing it? Because it's easy for us to say, oh, there's all these risks of implementation and integration. But I always think we're forgetting, is there a risk of us not doing it and being left behind? And I always remind myself that, and my team, that with any type of change or technology or innovation, people think the option is do nothing or move forward, where the option of do nothing might not really be an option. And so I do think looking at the opportunity there is sometimes more important than worrying about, well, what are all the reasons this could fail or all the things that could go wrong? What if we did this right and then really accelerated us forward in something we weren't even really sure what it could do for us? And so I always think about that risk of not doing anything as another kind of filter for me.
That's such an important mindset shift. It's easy to say no to avoid risk, but Courtney makes room for what could be lost by not exploring something further. That openness paired with discipline is what makes innovation possible without it taking over. Now, what I loved about this segment is how each leader brought in a different viewpoint. Courtney starts with the problem, Jim starts with the outcome, and Audrey starts with the usability. But they all share one thing in common. They don't chase tech, They chase impact. Now, up next, we're digging into how they protect their operations from being overrun by transformation, because sometimes innovation can actually slow you down if you don't manage it carefully. So, what happens after some project gets the green light? That's when the real challenge actually begins, because introducing transformation can't come at the expense of core business performance. So I asked each of them, how do you protect the P&L during change? How do you experiment, innovate, and adapt without losing focus on the day-to-day metrics that keep the business afloat? And how do you avoid having your team get distracted by the new shiny technology? Let's start with Courtney, who gave one of my favorite lines of this episode. By your role, what's your mission? It's a deceptively simple idea, but one that can completely transform how a company shields its core operations from unnecessary distraction.
I think the important thing, we do a pretty good job with by your role, what's your mission? And so it is not everybody's mission to spend a lot of time and improve and transform. And we've done a good job with really segmenting that out for our teams so people understand how they should be spending their time. We talk prioritization very frequently. And so we want to make sure to, especially as things flow down in the organization, that people are crystal clear on mission. And we talk about priorities and focus and what's in, like what has to be true a lot, like over and over again. And we do share our longer range plans with down to the floor with the broader organization. But it is a different cadence than what I share with my team. So, we talk about it much more frequently at our corporate office in terms of like, what are our, 3 to 5 year LRPs. We don't go through that as much with, people down to the manufacturing floor, but we also make sure that within the year, within the quarter, they're clear on mission and they're clear on what the business needs from them. And so whenever I go to a manufacturing facility on a plant visit, a couple of things that we do to keep people focused. We always bring a cross-functional partner with me. We do a town hall, we answer questions, but we also just get crystal clear on priorities, crystal clear on what the business needs from us. And then they get to tell us what we need from you to be successful. And it is an ongoing dialogue, and that is their mission. And I think if you don't have mission clarity, that's where people can get distracted. And like I said, I also have roles in my organization, like a strategy leader. Her mission is different. And, she does not spend as much time in the tactical run operations. I have a senior project manager, and her role is much different than our, commercialization project managers. And so I do think being clear on people's roles and people understanding those priorities, that helps people not be spending time where they shouldn't, but it should be an ongoing and regular conversation and a constant reminder to hold yourself accountable to that.
Once again, I love that. By your role, what's your mission? It's such a clean way to align responsibility and focus. If someone's job is to do something specific in running the business, don't drag them into, improvement experiments. If someone owns transformation, let them run fast. It's role clarity that keeps the chaos away. And speaking of avoiding chaos, Courtney also talked about how they operationalize experimentation without overwhelming any one team. Here she explains how they use a pod structure to run transformations in contained ways, protecting the rest of the business from unintended consequences. Listen to this.
We do a good job with when we start a new transformation, we keep it in, we call it like a pod. So we have a small group of people really working on it, and they are doing all the experimentation, all the fast failing. So before we really start to integrate it into our operating units, we know that it's in a really good place, and not that it's progress over perfection, but it helps make sure that we don't jeopardize our current operations. And I feel like having that in our central teams and not sitting in the operating units also protects for that as well. And then we do definitely pilot and roll it out within each of us as supply chain leaders, we can raise our hand and say, hey, my team will start this one. We kind of spread it out so that not one operating unit is taking the load of all the pilots and experimentation. And we do a review of that to say, okay, Morning Foods, Courtney, she's piloting agentic AI. We might have a planning system pilot in our meals and baking operation. And then our snacks operation, they're going to do a waste transformation pilot. So we do try to spread it out across our operating units, so you're not putting any heavy burden on one or the other, and you're not going to see as big impact. So we do try to say, what's the starting point and what's the biggest opportunity? And I think that also helps as well. And that helps with buy-in from the teams as they roll things out.
So that pod model is a smart way to create innovation capacity without draining operational performance. I love how they spread pilots across different operating units and keep tight controls until things are proven. It's a great example of how to scale without stress. Now let's shift to Jim, who comes at this challenge once again from a different angle. Jim looks at this through the lens of risk and ownership. He knows innovation brings uncertainty, but for Jim, it all comes down to one thing. Who owns that risk?
I think one of the things that really good operating companies do is they manage risk, right? And we view this on a risk spectrum, really. And this is, probably the biggest arguments we get into with, say, functional support organizations like IT is like, who owns the risk on things? And when it comes to operations, our operations leaders own the risks in our plants. We're the ones accountable for them. We're the ones responsible for everybody's safety. We're the ones who are accountable for the results that we're driving. So we do a risk balancing analysis on everything that we do to ensure that we have a right balance. And in many cases, what we're finding kind of more recently is we're willing to take on more risk than sometimes our functional help or even consultants think we're willing to take on, because again, it goes with the size of the prize, right? I think if we see a big opportunity to drive a major productivity shift in our operations, and it requires us to take a little bit of risk, say on a technology that's unproven, that we may fail at the first attempt on, or the first MVP of. That's all right. I mean, because we have to keep moving forward in this space. And I think that, as long as we go in eyes wide open on what the potential risks are, failure points, and what our retrenchment steps are, so that we can get moving again, or what our learning plan really is around these things, then that really helps us kind of guide the work and determine how fast we're going to go and how much risk we're going to take on. There's nothing that we do in operations every day that doesn't drive some sort of learning in how we operate or how our people perform or where we need to focus on. And, so by nature, my feeling is that, manufacturing and supply chain operations folks are really in a learning organization. And we are constantly facing different kinds of learning opportunities. Technology or the application of the technology is just one of those things that we have to be willing to experiment with, learn, and then adjust, and then keep moving.
Classic Jim, practical, structured, and grounded in accountability. What stood out for me is how he frames everything through a risk spectrum, ensuring there's a recovery plan if something goes sideways. He's not afraid of failure. He's just not willing to fail blindly. And now to Audrey, who takes a deeply human approach. So when I asked Audrey how she protects the business from being overwhelmed by transformation, her answer was powerful and very different. So instead of talking about shielding teams from change, she talked about empowering them through it. Because for her, the team isn't something to protect from transformation. It's the very reason that transformation exists. And that line, she says, actually really stuck with me, bringing this evolution of Industry 4.0 to their fingertips. Audrey doesn't push transformation top down. She builds it up, empowering people closest to the product, closest to the process, and decisions that impact performance in real time. It's a totally different viewpoint. Transformation as enablement, not distraction. Listen to her answer.
The operations team, because of their significant involvement in the day-to-day, when these types of transformations occur, they know quick enough. And this is why I always say that the Industry 4.0, bringing this data and visualization to the front lines is so key, because they touch and feel the product more than I touch the product, because they're right there at the front line. So in terms of the elements of how they really protect that bottom line, their decision making is critical. And again, bringing this message and bringing these tools and bringing this evolution of Industry 4.0 to their fingertips. That's why I'm so passionate to do this, because they own a lot of our critical decisions, hour to hour, day to day.
So I followed up and asked how she decides who should be part of the transformation initiatives and how she avoids pulling operators away from the day-to-day. Listen to this.
So we've designated a couple of roles in the operations where there are process improvement engineers that scope the field for new technologies and experiment with them. We also have a group of folks outside of my business unit that I don't directly manage, but they're part of our research and development group globally, that bring to us solutions of such to experiment again as well with new technologies. So again, how do I keep the team focused on the day-to-day without being distracted? We typically work with some of the individuals that I've described, either process improvement engineers or R&D folks, to really embed it in times where we can afford to come in and help experiment with some of the technologies. So it's kind of an art form that we do. And then once the experiments take place, we collect the data and we either move forward with furthering the technologies to different phases, or we say, no, this just wasn't worth it. So I think there's multiple prong approaches that we take, but I'd say the day-to-day operators are running the day-to-day operations.
Now, from what I've learned, that kind of structural separation is what allows her to move fast without breaking things. So we've explored how these leaders juggle priorities, evaluate technologies, and shield their operations from chaos. But what I wanted to end this episode with is a question that gets a little bit more personal. If you're leading a P&L, you know that transformation needs to happen, but performance still has to be delivered. What advice would you give? This is where theory meets pressure. It's one thing to believe in change. It's another thing to bet your performance on it. Jim didn't hesitate for a second when I asked him this question. His advice? Cut through the noise. Don't wait for a perfect plan. Just start. Listen.
My first piece of advice to anyone contemplating Industry 4.0 types of work is you better get going. Because if you don't, your competition's already started. And I think it's really important that we realize in today's game, with the challenges that we have with manufacturing in the United States in terms of employment, people availability, turnover, other things like that. This is the path forward, right? And not that we're trying to replace jobs or eliminate people, but that we just are operating in a very, kind of volatile and changing world when it comes to manufacturing in the U.S. So, I think the clearest way to mitigate those problems and to help support your efforts in driving the kind of productivity and customer service you want is to do Industry 4.0 types of initiatives. So, you can begin small with experimentation, learn, and certainly reach out and find a network that can give you, kind of positive reinforcement, as well as best practices and learning from failure. I mean, we've all failed at something somewhere along the way in this space, and I think that as a community, we're pretty open with sharing what those failures are and how to avoid them in the future. So, that would be my piece of advice: is get moving, because if you aren't, you're behind. Number two, you can start small and be focused, focus on something like an asset reliability or a quality issue or something like that, to use technology and monitoring and other techniques. And then, find yourself a good network. We talked about, a few like LNS, Gartner, ARC, et cetera. Use a network of manufacturing experts and colleagues, because they're the ones who know and have experienced both the successes and the growing pains of working in this space. And I think everybody's more than willing to share. I find it a very supportive and collaborative community, even if we're competing against each other in things.
That's the formula. Get going, start small, scale smart. Jim isn't saying go all in on day one. He's saying get the reps in early, pilot, learn, and then expand across your network once it works. The key takeaway: momentum matters more than mastery. Then Jim comments on challenging his team with a question I really like: to think about what should work look like in 3 to 5 years from now. Listen to what he has to say about that.
In a more recent conversation I've had with my team on our kind of digital strategy for operations, is really asking ourselves, in 3 to 5 years, how do we want our people working differently? We are continuing to drive and mature in our operating system, which we're using TPM as our operating system in our operations. But we also know that enabling our people to work more efficiently, more seamlessly with information and analytics and data in our operations every single day, not only support our TPM efforts, but also support our productivity and our operational stability, as well as our operational safety kind of standards. And, I just recently, in a meeting that I had with my team last month, challenged them to start thinking about, like, what does the future of work in Owens Corning manufacturing look like in 5 years? What's a day in a life of our employees look like? How are they using technology to be more productive? How are we using automation to remove, dirty, dangerous, and dull jobs in our operations and help offset, the turnover that we see in our plants, as well as the retirement and graying of our workforce? And how do we really accelerate our progress in our goals and our productivity kind of efforts, using technology and differentiating the way our people work? The younger people coming into our operations today are used to doing everything on their mobile phone, right? We don't have a mobile phone kind of enabled manufacturing platform today in Owens Corning. Do we need one? How do we want people to work? How seamless does it need to be? How can we cut training and development timelines down significantly in our operations for our people to learn how to operate using technology? These are all, I think, the big questions out there that we've got to wrestle with, address, and keep driving forward over the next 3 to 5 years, because it's going to be a differentiator in the success of our company long term.
What I love about this is Jim isn't choosing between today and tomorrow. He's leading with both timelines in mind. He's got to hit quarterly numbers, just like everyone else, but that doesn't stop him from his long-term strategic thinking. Now let's shift to Courtney, whose advice focuses on the mindset and behavior needed to lead through complexity. She didn't jump into process or tools. She started with mindset, specifically the importance of staying open and making transformation digestible for others.
So as I think about advice, I would say making sure you have a learning mindset. I would say making sure that you're building the capability of you and your team, encouraging experimentation, and then really making connections across. I think our role, the most important part, is being great simplifiers. Our operating unit teams, they're not going to understand all the details. They're not going to understand all the implications of what's coming. You have to be able to simplify that in a way so they understand what's happening, what the opportunities are, what the risks are, what we're doing to mitigate. That really is our job. And so if you can be a great simplifier, you'll be successful, I think, as you think about navigating transformations within your organizations. But you have to stay connected and stay aligned.
Be a great simplifier is one of the best pieces of leadership advice I've heard. People can't follow what they don't understand. And if you can distill complexity into clarity, you become a leader people want to follow through that change. And now to Audrey. Her advice starts with humility and adaptability and a strong sense of shared accountability. She doesn't pretend transformation's easy, but she's clear about how to make it work.
My biggest piece of advice is not think that you have all the answers, number one. The number two that comes to mind is have a plan, but be flexible enough that you're going to have to adapt. And I talk about technologies, and this space continues to evolve so quickly that be experimental. Because again, there will be this experiment that you'll have to learn from very quickly. To either make it fail faster or not. And also having the right people who understand the concept of what 4.0 really means on your team.
That line, don't think that you have all the answers, I'd say it isn't just advice. It's a leadership philosophy. Audrey reminds us that transformation isn't about ego, it's about listening, adapting, and making sure you've built a team that understands the why, not just the what. That's how you lead through complexity, by building trust, not just roadmaps. Audrey also brought up something that I think ties this whole episode together. To her, running an efficient operation, especially during transformation, starts with one thing: listening.
If you want to run an efficient operations, my advice would be to listen to your people. Listen to your people and be able to react for their needs. Because usually operators will come to you and say, if we had this, we could do it better. And we take that information and they're seeking for action. So leaders need to respect the voice of the operators and be able to bring these actions to them in a quick enough manner so that they can bring the solution to make their world a much more efficient space. Because that's what they do. Operators are always looking for efficiencies.
Powerful. Listen to your people. It seems so simple, not just for feedback, but for ideas, warnings, and even opportunities. She reminds us that the people, the team, the frontline workers, they aren't just executing what they're supposed to be doing. They're observing, they're improving, and they're innovating, even in small ways, all the time. You want transformation that sticks? Start by listening better. And by the way, after she said that, I actually went back to all 3 interviews, and with a little help from my generative AI friends, I asked what was the most commonly talked about concept across all 3 interviews. The most consistently repeated concept was actually people, with 30 different times that it was discussed. Everything related to people's roles, engagement, ownership, and the impact on transformation and operations. I thought that was a little interesting fun fact. And that brings us to the end of episode 2. So what I really loved about this is how differently each of these leaders approached their role and how that shapes their answers to these questions. Audrey, as a president, owns every part of the business, like we already went over. Her focus is broad, her leadership is people-centered, and her advice deeply tied to culture and action on the ground. Jim, by contrast, leads a far larger team and network, and this gives him a structured and a scale to think more long-term in the design while still delivering quarter after quarter. And I love one of the things he said, get going, start small, and scale when you're ready. And then there's Courtney, who operates in a matrix, owning results, but not every direct report. Her clarity of purpose and simplification mindset and laser focus on alignment stood out every time she spoke. Now, if there's one thing that I would like to have as a takeaway from all this, great P&L leaders don't wait for perfect alignment. They create clarity, they earn trust, and they move forward anyway. Whether you're leading a team of 50 or 5,000, that's your blueprint. And with that, we'll see you next time on Smart Manufacturing Mindset.